From forgotten army caches to underground military complexes, history hides far more than we usually imagine. Today on the TopFacts channel, we will see bunkers where soldiers' personal belongings remain, Hitler's secret headquarters, camps that people preferred not to mention, and gigantic rocket platforms that could have changed the course of the war. Watch until the very end. With a name like Wolf's Lair, or Wolf's Schanze in German, it is easy to picture a grim place from an old fairy tale. Yet this location in Poland was no fantasy, but the real epicenter of a dark chapter in history. Hidden in the dense forests of Masuria near the village of Giżycko, then Germany, now Poland, this secret military headquarters of Hitler was built in 1941 as part of Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. The site was chosen deliberately. Remoteness, thick vegetation, and total invisibility made it ideal for the commander-in-chief's staff. After the war ended in 1945, the Wolf's Lair was abandoned. Years passed, nature reclaimed the place, and history seemed to forget. Yet in the 1990s, after the fall of communism, everything changed. Polish historians and archaeologists, like real-life Indiana Joneses, began clearing the ruins, revealing a tangled network of bunkers, barracks, and possibly secret rooms. Then came a new twist. In 2024, the Late Bra Foundation from Gdansk made a truly eerie discovery. 5 human skeletons buried beneath the ruins of a building that had belonged to Hermann Göring, a high-ranking Nazi official. Among the dead were 3 adults, a teenager, and an infant. Strangest of all, no clothing, no personal belongings, no arms or legs. Only skeletons, beside which lay fossils of ancient marine creatures, belemnites. The Polish prosecutor's office took up the case, but the bones were so ravaged by time that even Sherlock Holmes would likely have uncovered nothing. By March 2024, the investigation was closed, leaving more questions than answers. In May 2008, a seemingly ordinary walk along the sands of Denmark's west coast near Hovig suddenly became a stroke of fate for all who live for history. 2 clever 9-year-old boys stumbled upon a bucket peeking from a dune, and that small find opened a gateway to a past that had lain under layers of time for more than 60 years. Beneath the sand were 4 German bunkers from the Second World War, an untouched time capsule seemingly preserved for posterity. Tommy Casso, an electrician and avid history buff, could not believe his eyes. He compared his first entry to traveling into a pyramid full of mummies, and in some ways, it truly was. Inside, everything remained: beds, chairs, and even such everyday trifles as socks and underwear, a reminder that even soldiers cannot escape daily life. They found rusty canned goods, medicine vials, even ampules with an antidote to mustard gas, soda bottles, and books. Imagine, stamps bearing Hitler's image just lying on the floor, next to keys, hammers, and other small tools last held by people long gone from this world. Jens Andersen, curator of the Hanstholm Museum specializing in Nazi fortifications, was stunned. Of roughly 7,000 bunkers built along Denmark's western coast, not one had been found in such preserved condition. It was a unique chance to peer into the lives of Third Reich soldiers as if a time machine had truly worked. News spread like wildfire. Thousands flocked to Hovig, from Denmark and from Germany. Tour groups wound through the cramped bunkers of 20 square meters, where 9 soldiers and a commander had once crowded together. A heated debate followed. Should the site be preserved as a historical object or erased from the face of the earth? 27th, January 1945. The clock nears 3 in the afternoon, a frosty day. Soldiers of the Soviet Army's 322nd Rifle Division advance steadily across snow-covered Polish ground. They belong to the 60th Army and take part in an offensive operation of the Second World War. At that moment, none of them can imagine that their steps will lead to one of the most horrifying discoveries in human history. What they saw at Auschwitz defies description. About 7,000 prisoners, emaciated, exhausted, mere shadows of themselves, were still alive. Among them were mostly adults, but also children, too young to grasp the full horror of what was happening. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. Inside the camp, the soldiers found an appalling inventory of death. 600 corpses, 370,000 men's suits, 83,700 women's dresses, and worst of all, 7 tons of human hair. You might think you had entered a nightmarish clothing warehouse, but this was reality. Cold, inhuman, documented. Let us look a little earlier. Just before the Soviet arrival, the Nazis hastily organized a so-called death march, driving about 60,000 prisoners from the camp. They walked in brutal conditions, frost, starvation, and the constant threat of being shot if they lagged behind. The cruelty staggers even the most hardened veterans. Even General Vasily Petrenko, a battle-hardened veteran, was shaken. He admitted he had never seen such pure, unbridled hatred as that shown by the camp guards toward the dying people, reduced to skeletons. Yet amid this abyss of horror, human compassion broke through. Soviet soldiers and the Polish Red Cross launched an emergency rescue. Red Army medical stations admitted about 4,500 survivors. It was a breath of air amid the toxic fumes of history, a tiny ray of hope piercing the darkness. Auschwitz remains in humanity's memory as a symbol of inhuman cruelty and, at the same time, a vital reminder of how terrifying uncontrolled power, fueled by an ideology of hatred, can be. Sometimes history is hidden not in the Amazon jungle or on sunken ships, but right beneath your feet, say, under an unremarkable parking lot in central Hamburg. That is exactly what happened in the mid-1980s, when 3 German submarines from the Second World War, U-2545, U-3004, and U-3505, were accidentally discovered. But the most astonishing thing was not the submarines themselves, but where they lay. These giants of the deep rested in the concrete depths of Elbatu, a secret bunker shelter built to protect the Nazi submarine fleet from relentless Allied raids. This massive complex sat right on the banks of the Elbe River and was meant to be a fortress for building and repairing submarines, hidden from enemy eyes and shielded from bombs. Grand plans, however, cracked. In April 1945, barely a month before Germany's capitulation, a powerful Allied air raid partially collapsed the bunker's roof. The submarines were trapped in a concrete cage, literally buried in their own citadel. After the war, authorities deemed dismantling the bunker too costly and dangerous. The simple solution: fill it with rubble, pour concrete, build a parking lot atop it, and forget. But history does not surrender without a fight. In the 1980s, a group of enthusiasts, including Jacek Malman, Wolfgang Hirschfeld, and Walter Klutz, took up the investigation. They studied archives, sought documents, compared blueprints, and followed leads long forgotten. Their efforts paid off, and one of the most closely guarded secrets of Nazi military engineering unfolded before them. Sometimes the most important discoveries begin with something entirely mundane. In 2004, British military historian Gary Stern stumbled upon an old wartime map of the Second World War. But this map was special. It marked a mysterious site near Grand Camp Maisie in Normandy, labeled High Resistance Area. Stern's historian's instinct flared. Something more than an overgrown field lay here. He went to the spot, and what he uncovered overturned our understanding of one of the war's most famous theaters. Hidden under layers of grass, brush, and oblivion was the lost Maisie Battery, a huge German artillery complex long thought destroyed or imaginary, yet in fact concealed in plain sight. Without hesitation, Stern purchased the land and began extensive excavations. Under his direction, a research team opened an underground labyrinth of bunkers, artillery emplacements, and more than 2 kilometers of trenches. The cherry, on top, an underground hospital with preserved medical supplies. This discovery not only added a stroke to the war's picture, it rewrote its plot. It was Maisie Battery that played a key role during the Allied landing in Normandy on June 6, 1944. The day forever known as D-Day. Yet its exact location had been lost, hidden in official documents and forgotten memory. Only 60 years later, thanks to Stern's persistence, did the truth come to light. After major restoration in June 2006, the Maisie Battery opened its doors again, this time to visitors. And who could have guessed? It all lay right underfoot, silently waiting its moment to tell its story to those willing to listen. Let us journey to northern France, where under layers of earth and concrete history still breathes, full of secrets, destruction, and scientific madness. We speak of La Coupole, a gigantic Nazi bunker meant to be a launch site for deadly V-2 rockets targeting London and other British cities. Construction of the complex began in October 1943 near the town of Saint-Omer and continued until July 1944. The location was chosen wisely. Proximity to the English Channel, railways, and logistical hubs made it ideal for supply and combat readiness. Yet La Coupole was more than a bunker. It was an engineering ambition crowned by a 77-meter concrete dome 5.5 meters thick, a wall that the Germans hoped neither bombs nor time could pierce. History, however, had other plans. Constant Allied air raids, especially after the Normandy landing in June 1944, paralyzed construction. The Germans never launched a single rocket from there. La Coupole, despite its frightening scale, remained a dead giant, a project never destined to reach full operation. What to do with such a colossus after the war? The answer proved unexpectedly enlightening. In the 1980s began the transformation of the concrete monster into a cultural and educational center. In 1997, La Coupole opened its doors as a museum devoted to the occupation of France, Third Reich technology, and the fateful moments of the Second World War. What we build in moments of despair often says more about us than any words. Blockhaus de Perlec, a concrete monster lurking in the forests of northern France, is one of the brightest embodiments of Nazi engineering madness. This giant was conceived as an advanced base for the mass preparation and launch of V-2 rockets, the very weapons meant to rain daily on London and spread panic in Britain. Construction began in March 1943 and continued until September of the same year. The official designation sounded harmless: Kraftwerk Nordwest, Northwest Power Plant. But behind that innocuous name hid a plan to launch up to 36 rockets a day. Everything was calculated to the last detail, from the geographic position, only 200 kilometers to London, to protection from naval artillery. Surrounding the site were transport hubs, power grids, and the canalized Aar River. The entire infrastructure served one goal: destruction. The sheer volume of materials speaks for itself. More than 200,000 tons of concrete, and 20,000 tons of steel. But above all, people. About 6,000 workers, including forcibly mobilized residents of occupied countries, toiled 12 hours a day in inhuman conditions to raise this behemoth. It was to be not merely a launch platform, but an autonomous rocket city, with its own rail junction, oxygen plant, and storage system. After France's liberation, the Allies discovered the site in September 1944. Engineers and soldiers studied it, piecing together the Nazis' plans. Though attempts to repurpose the bunker for civilian needs failed, its later fate proved unexpected. Since 1973, Blockhaus de Perlec has been open to the public as a museum. In 1986, it received historic monument status. Now anyone may walk its grim corridors, staring at concrete walls that once might have changed the course of history. During the Second World War, the German army not only occupied Normandy and continental Europe, it penetrated the far-flung patches of the British Crown, the Channel Islands. Here, on Jersey, a network was born underground that could have become a fortress of the future. The Germans created an entire subterranean world under the code name Hohlgangsanlage, German for cave passage. And although it sounds like a Jules Verne fantasy, it was frighteningly real. The project started in 1941 when Hitler ordered the Atlantic Wall reinforced, the defensive line stretching along Europe's entire western coast. Jersey, as one point, was to become a fortress. Engineering works were assigned to the infamous organization TOT, which used the labor of prisoners, captives, and forcibly mobilized civilians. For many, it was a one-way road. People worked to exhaustion, suffered from hunger, disease, and guard brutality. Tunnels were driven through brittle schist, quickly but dangerously. After excavation, they were coated with concrete to prevent collapse. These labyrinths linked bunkers, depots, command posts, and barracks, forming a true underground defense system. One of the most notable sites is H8. It was initially to be an arms depot, but by 1943 it had been converted into an underground hospital. It was planned to house up to 500 beds, operating rooms, ventilation systems, and heating, everything to treat wounded soldiers underground, away from bombings. Yet by war's end, this hospital had never been used as intended. When Jersey was liberated on 9 May 1945, the tunnels were mothballed. In 1946, the island authorities decided to turn H8 into a museum. And in 1961, a court ruled that ownership of the land remained with private landowners. Thus began a new chapter. H8 became what it remains today, the Jersey War Tunnels Museum. History is not only about triumphs and defeats, it is also about moments that make us freeze in disbelief at what humanity can do. April 1945. The American Army, 3rd Armored Division and 104th Infantry Division, pushes rapidly into central Germany. Approaching is the town of Nordhausen. Intelligence hints. Something important connected to Nazi technology lies ahead. What they find is staggering. It is not merely a strategic object. It is hell on earth, the Mittelbau Dora concentration camp, built for one purpose, producing V-2 rockets. Rockets that spread terror in London and other cities. But each came at a monstrous cost. When the soldiers entered the camp, they met a scene never to be forgotten. More than 250 prisoners, worn to the limit, literally hovered between life and death. They had been abandoned. The guards fled, leaving people to die in the underground where they had barely been surviving. Without hesitation, the soldiers ignored combat orders and rushed to help. An emergency evacuation began. People were carried from the tunnels, given first medical aid, field hospitals were set up. It was not merely a military operation, it was an act of rescue and humanity. The camp had opened in late 1943 as a branch of Buchenwald. Prisoners worked 14 hours a day under conditions that would break even a trained soldier. Production tunnels were carved into mountains, without ventilation, without light, with no basic safety. Inside was not life, but a tormenting wait for the end. Medicines were absent. Food, a pitiful semblance. Of roughly 60,000 inmates who passed through the camp, about 20,000 died. Yet the liberation of Baora became a turning point. The Allies gained undeniable proof of Nazi slave labor in industry. These materials later formed the basis of court proceedings and war tribunals. The factory's concrete walls where rockets were produced hold not only echoes of engineering achievements, but also the groans of those who became their shadows. At first glance, these are merely forested mountains in southwestern Poland. But beneath rocks, trees, and grass lies one of the most mysterious and frightening construction programs of the Third Reich. Project Ries, German for giant, became a symbol of grandiosity, paranoia, and horror all at once. Work on these underground complexes began around 1943 and continued until the war's end. 7 gigantic sites, connected by a network of tunnels, were dug in the Owl Mountains near Książ Castle. The goal? Here, the riddles begin. No document survives complete. Even today, historians argue, were these underground realms intended as Hitler's future refuge and headquarters in case of defeat? Or was it a secret factory assembling the newest, possibly experimental weapons? Theories abound, while the truth lies buried deeper than the concrete vaults. One fact is certain: construction was carried out with terrifying brutality. Thousands of concentration camp inmates, prisoners of war, and forced laborers were driven into those mountains. People dug with their hands and primitive tools, spending hours without seeing daylight, choking on dust and falling rock. Disease, hunger, exhaustion. Many died there, their bones part of the project itself. September 1944. The war rolls toward its bloody finale, and Allied forces advance steadily across France. One key objective is a massive German coastal artillery installation on the English Channel, the Maisie Battery. Located near Cap Gris-Nez, it was not merely guns, but an entire fortress able to shell the British coast at ranges exceeding 55 kilometers. The battery consisted of 4 bunkers, each hiding a 380mm naval gun, a battleship arsenal set ashore. Destroying such a monster from the air was nearly impossible. Thus, Canada's elite 3rd Infantry Division, and especially the Coatee Detachment of the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, joined the operation. The mission was codenamed Undergo. It sounds harmless, almost peaceful, but in reality it was a fierce attack akin to storming an ancient castle with dragons inside. 29 September 1944. The sky over the battery darkened as the Royal Air Force dropped 2,000 tons of bombs, trying to crack the bunker's concrete skulls. Yet the concrete held. The ground looked like a lunar landscape, and the battery stood fast. Then the land phase began. Canadian soldiers, under tank cover and wielding flamethrowers, stormed forward. Inside the concrete, giant stubborn German fighters held out, but by evening it was clear. Their situation was hopeless. Soon, the garrison surrendered, and the Maisie Battery fell into Allied hands. This was a crucial step. From that moment, the channel became safer for shipping, and the threat of artillery fire from France vanished. After the war, one of the 4 bunkers was spared demolition and turned into a museum. Today, it is part of the Atlantic Wall Museum. Visitors can not only view exhibits, they can feel the scale, walk long corridors, peer into gun chambers, and sense what a true fortress of war meant. So friends, how did you like our new episode? Be sure to write everything you think about it in the comments, and do not forget to watch our other videos appearing on the screen right now. Thank you for watching, and subscribe to the Top Facts channel.